have saved something for this. Now we go to the question and answers, and I saved myself a little present for the question and answer section. All right, so here we go. And since this is not an academic seminar, I will entertain not only questions but also just comments. People would just want to make a comment. And somebody else should moderate. I always think that the person who talks should never moderate. So somebody else want to call on people? We've got questions. Emily.
When people ask, like, so what is the difference, the important difference between social programs helping people and then UBI just giving money to people? Like,
there's one really big difference, is the absence of judgment. Is that if you're for basic income, you don't want to judge people. It's just stop judging, start helping. Is that we got to give up this idea that people who are privileged are better and know better than everybody else. That they know what's wrong with the other people, and they know what the other people need to do to prove themselves. And of course, the first thing that everybody else is supposed to do to prove themselves is to work for the more privileged. So it's a really self-serving idea of what we need people to prove themselves. And we have very few programs that don't have that judgment. The minimum of Social Security is very low if you haven't proven yourself by working. Even the one program that we have that you get just because you're poor, without having to prove that you're disabled or unemployed or something, that doesn't have any other conditions with it, is the refundable tax credit. There's a refundable child tax credit, which is really small. And then there's food stamps. But food stamps have a different kind of judgment. Food stamps say, oh, okay, this one, we're not going to ask you to prove anything by working for it. So we're just going to think you don't know what to spend your money on, because we're better than you are. And there are very few people that don't know what their basic needs are. Believe me, I used to live in the East Village. I knew heroin addicts, okay? The heroin addicts, yeah, they bought their drugs every day. They also, you didn't see them starving to death or not buying their, what is it heroin addicts need other than heroin? The laxatives. They know they need those laxatives as much as they need the heroin, okay? There are very few people who are just starving themselves to death because they are such poor judges of that. And most of the poor are not heroin addicts. Most of the poor are people who are as smart and capable as everybody else and live in an unfair world. So that's the big difference. Absence of judgment.
Leah, I think, had a question.
Thanks for coming. I heard you say something on a video where you said that, I'm going to screw it up, but I'll try my best. It was just like that the biggest challenge for society is to not further oppress people who are already disadvantaged. And you mentioned something about totally false social contracts between women and men. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious what you mean.
Well, okay, that is, wow, you're getting deep into my theory. I'm an over-ambitious philosopher who is, I've written a book called Prehistoric Myths in Modern Political Philosophy that argues that the prevailing theory justifying government is full of crap, and the prevailing theory justifying private property is also full of crap. I have another book arguing that they're full of crap, and then two other books. One's, and some of these are finished and some of them aren't, building up my own theories. I'm trying to knock down existing theories of justice, building up, and you're going into like the deepest end of that. Okay, is that the idea that justifies, also, most questions you can ask me related to basic income are something that I have a speech about. So, is that what the state has to do to justify itself is to make everybody better off than they would be in the so-called state of nature without the government. And what I argue in one of my books is that this is empirically false. If you look at the worst off people in our society today, the most oppressed people, they, as a philosopher, economist named Henry George said over 100 years ago, he said, if you offered them a chance to exchange with someone someone who lived in the Central African rainforest, they couldn't afford to say no. They'd actually be better off. And it's still, if you look at somebody in a shanty town in Sao Paulo who's making our clothing versus somebody in the part of the Amazon that they haven't burned down yet, the people in the Amazon very often have better lives. And I've got a long empirical argument for that, if you doubt what I'm saying. Now, that's a simple argument that we haven't done it. But of course my solution is, well, we just need to start doing it. It's not that hard. It's not that people in the Amazon do very well. It's just that we treat the oppressed so poorly. Now, basing on the work of Karl, the feminist philosopher, who wrote a book called The Sexual Contract. It was then followed up by Charles Mills, based on her work that wrote the racial contract. And the two together talk about settler contracts, where colonial powers come in, and they have a social contract that it's really only for the men. Women don't count. It's only for the white people, the other races don't count. Or it's only for the settler communities, not for the indigenous communities. Is that our social contracts have tended to be not real social contracts, but there's insiders and there's outsiders. Now, the argument that I'm trying to craft is that we always fail to make a true social contract. Is that we always have some outgroup that we never quite treat well enough to give them rational, reasonable reasons to sign up and say, yes, I'm part of the social contract, this society works for me. Well, if they're killing your people, if the police are killing people from your group at several times the rate that they're killing people from the in-group, maybe you shouldn't be consenting to stay. Maybe there is no social contract that includes you. Now, the argument that I get is, of course, we should try to make a social contract that includes everybody, that has no outgroup, but we will fail. Because everyone suffers from self-serving bias. So what we have to do is have not only a basic income high enough to make sure that you have a voluntary participation economy where you don't have to work if you don't choose to, but also we have to have the highest sustainable basic income, because we want to err on giving asking as little as possible and giving as much as possible to the least advantaged in our society. That is the closest we can come to creating a true, inclusive social contract, and still we will fail. That's where that argument comes.
I saw a hand here, and then there's somebody down here.
Thanks, Karl. I came a little late. My question is, you've been doing this for 39 years. I wasn't even born. How come the big media, like CNN, they never talk about basic income? If I didn't know you, or Elizabeth, I would never hear about universal basic income. And what explains the war on poverty or the war on poor people in this country? For someone who wasn't born here, for us, this country is so rich, there shouldn't be no poor in this country. It's ridiculous how people don't have health care in the wealthiest nation in the history of humanity. And instead of spending that money on basic things, they spend it on wars or something else. But I want to be short. My real concern is the stigmatization of poor people and the downsizing of the middle class. It's one medical bill before we all get bankrupt, which is really crazy if you think about it. So how come we never heard about universal basic income on the news, on the big media news, and also what explains how rich people were able to regulate the narrative, to tell us that if you work 40 hours, you don't have free healthcare, you're probably lazy. That's my question. I don't want to be too long.
Well, there's no one answer. There's no one answer to that. There's so many different reasons. It's older than America. I remember a sociologist at the first basic income conference in the United States back in 2002 saying, we've been worrying about giving alms to the sturdy beggar since the Elizabethan era, and we've got to get our heads out of this idea. Part of it is, the general thing, I think, is self-serving bias. Is that the people who are well off control the narrative, and they do not understand the extent to which they are furthering, what they're doing is self-serving. They convince themselves that it is justice when it's their own extremely biased perspective of justice from their own standpoint. And then this follows from another idea that the belief in a just world that affects not only the self-serving bias of the well-to-do, but also it affects the rest of us are likely to have bias in the favor of the well-to-do. It's the belief in a just world is that it's really painful to believe. It's really painful to believe that you can do everything right and still everything will go wrong for you. It is much, even if you're a low-down person who lives in poverty and but it is in many ways more pleasant to believe that I have largely dug this own hole. Maybe I've had a phone about what we breaks, but it's not that things are fundamentally stacked against them. So this narrative, this control at the top, actually affects a lot of other people. Now, and then another thing is classism and racism. And I always feel uncomfortable when a black man asks me a question about racism, or a woman asks me about sexism. I teach in the Middle East, so I'm always telling a group of Muslims about Western prejudice against Muslims, which is tough as well. Now, but in this country, race is inseparable from class in this country. People say, is it race or is it class? Which to me is a stupid question, because blacks were brought here to be a class. They were brought here to be the extra low class. And even today, there's, I think some of the two main kinds of prejudice you see is like, oh, you're not fitting into that extra low class, so we don't like you for doing that. Or, oh, we just assume you're in this extra low class, so we're going to assume you do all these bad things that we think people in the extra low class do. So still, race is class. And so the idea is that it allows people at the top to believe that there's these bad values at the bottom. And the real problem, people don't know how to spend, they don't know how to save, they don't know how to work, they don't want to work. And they can tell themselves this, that becomes part of this overall narrative. And there is, I think, less of a sense of solidarity in this country as there are in other countries. But even in places like Sweden, that, in Sweden, everybody thinks Sweden, they're all in it together and they're everybody. And a lot of Swedish people have told me that might have been true 40 years ago, but that's not true anymore. They're not as bad off as we are, but they've gutted their welfare system and they've started to think of the lower class Swedes as bad as everybody else. And I don't think that our our ethnic diversity means that we necessarily have to treat each other poorly. I think if you look at Finland and Norway, the surviving good welfare systems, you find a lot of diverse. We don't think of them being diverse because they don't think it's such a big deal. They've got, in Finland, they've got the Lapps, they've got women, they've got town people, they've got country people, they got rich people, they got poor people, they got immigrants, they got Russians, they got Swedish minorities. They got a lot of economic and ethnic diversity, but they don't make a big deal out of it. I think we can do that too.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, so my question, I see that people in America maybe can think of UBI well because they see that we're in this time where the economy is doing relatively well, but the inequality is growing. How different do you think UBI would look in a time of economic recession or depression?
Well, economically, UBI is really good for that because a UBI system is an automatic stabilizer. UBI itself is not an automatic stabilizer because everybody gets it. However, you have to look at it in combination with the taxes that finance it. So when we go into recession, people are making less income, so they're paying less taxes, but they're getting the same basic income. So the amount they pay goes down, the amount they receive stays the same, and that means that there's net bigger redistribution whenever there's a recession. And when you have that, that's called, economists call that an automatic stabilizer. It makes the recessions not as bad as the other ones were. It also helps to prop up wages, because when you have a recession, one of the things that happen is wages stop growing and even decline because people are out there competing even harder for the jobs. People are less likely to accept a pay cut in a recession. So in that sense, it has a lot of really good effects. And really, the most important reason to not want to be in a recession is poverty. And basic income, if it's high enough, will eliminate poverty, so we shouldn't care that much. When we have a recession, a big, big recession would be if our output goes down by 5%. We're one of the richest countries in the world. And we have who actually really gives a crap if our income goes down by 5%? That's the worst thing that happens to you. If I look at what's going to happen in the rest of my life, once in a while my income's going to go down by 5%, but every other year it's going to go up for 3%. And I'm going to be twice as well off in 40 years. I'm like, okay, I'll take the occasional 5% dip. I would barely even notice it because I'll be saving a lot of that money. I'll barely notice it. But I guess, as Umar was saying, we're one of the richest countries in the world. We shouldn't really be caring about that. The only reason we should be caring about whether a recession is because, our response as a people to recession is you guys live in abject poverty and the rest of us will go on living great. That's why recessions are a problem. So really, recessions aren't even a problem anymore if we have basic income.
Over here, and then we'll go to so I hadn't heard about universal basic income about 2 months ago, and after looking a bunch about it, one thing that I saw that it seems to be necessary, not only like in the future when income, gets further apart, but also today to allow capitalist markets to actually function. Similar to like antitrust, which isn't capitalist, but it allows those markets to function. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts or commentary on that, like nature of UBI.
I'm sorry.
It's like if you don't have enough people with money and purchasing power to actually allow person-to-person transactions, those markets start breaking down. And I think we're already kind of seeing that. So universal basic income almost seems like a function that needs to be put in place to allow that to happen. At least that was my perspective of it.
Wait. You need to put UBI in place for what?
Just to allow our capitalist markets to actually function in their actual appropriate manner, similar to an antitrust law.
That's part of the argument. That's part of the argument of being an automatic stabilizer, and that's Theodore Roosevelt was talking about things like that in the Great Depression, about what he was saying. He was priming the pump. Andrew Yang is now talking about it as a trickle-up economy. And it is much better if we have things trickling up. And the idea, if it makes any sense to have rich capitalist investors, it's because they're investing things that people want. But if the people don't have any money, they're just going to invest in things that other rich people want. Or, worse than that, they'll just buy up assets and make it more expensive for us to get housing because they just bid up the price of all the real estate in the country. So yeah, I think capitalism works a lot better. with a basic income. And whether you should call it, even call it capitalism, if you're not forcing people to participate anymore, that's up to your sense of definition. But market economy, whatever you call it.
Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions, and then we're going to have kind of informal. If you want to chat with Karl and ask more questions, feel free. Blaze is next, and then we'll end on this note here. We'll do 3 questions. Let's see what we have.
All right, there are so many things that I would love to pick your brain about, but I'll ask what I think is perhaps the most important question, because in Louisiana we face an existential threat from climate change. Do you see any potential for UBI to positively impact the problems we're facing because of climate change?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad that people are starting to care about climate change. However, I would rank climate change actually about 5th on our list of existential environmental threats. We've had climate change before, massive changes in climate, and it's caused a lot of extinctions, but it's never caused the death of everything. Fukushima could be causing the death of everything right now. So I would just Fukushima alone, not to mention the rest of nuclear power, which nuclear power is the cleanest energy there is, as long as humans never make mistakes. Then it's the worst energy there is. And so Fukushima alone, I think, is worse. Plastics in the oceans, plastics in the groundwater, other toxins in the groundwater, the oxygen depletion of the oceans caused by our fertilizers and other things. Just basic loss of habitat. Which could already, it seems to we're already in the insect apocalypse and the amphibian apocalypse, and still we're not wising up to this. So we're living through general environmental collapse, and we're just barely getting to talk about climate change. Now, basic income doesn't do anything directly for that basic income alone, but does a lot of things indirectly, can be an important part of the strategy. Because when I was talking about earlier, I was saying the idea of basic income, as I see it, is you pay for the resources you use, you get paid for the resources that everybody else uses, and this should include an overcharge for things that are bad for the environment. So, for anything that pollutes, causes global warming, you should be paying not the profit-maximizing amount, but way more than the profit-maximizing amount to really discourage this. And that means, so when you're getting more in basic income than you're paying, you should be proud of that. Look, what a low resource, what a good job I'm doing as a steward of our environment. That's why I get to consume the services provided by you guys, the polluters. Because I'm polluting less than you are. I'm not flying around in my private jet or whatever. So it can be used as part of that kind of strategy. It can also cushion people. If you're saying, okay, we're not going to have coal anymore because it's so horrible for the environment, but the coal workers are going to be taken care of, not at a really minimal level, but hopefully at a better level, because we have a really high and generous basic income. So in those indirect ways, I think it's an important part of a really good environmental strategy, overall environmental strategy, not just climate change.
Here, and then we got one in the back.
So, earlier you mentioned that group of people, I think you said the 1820s, that were so despondent after losing their jobs, they essentially had to become like servants, just so that they wouldn't die. So my question is, in 2019, with all the advancements in technology and everything this culture has created, is mobility between job industries greater than it was back then, right? So, and then that kind of curtails on the next part of that question, which is, you know, Andrew Yang always mentions the truck drivers, 3.5 million truck drivers, average age 49, ex-military, chronic background. What are those people going to have an easier time doing a drastic industry shift, you know, just to have a job with maybe a similar wage than somebody would have had 200 years ago? And with that being said, using the truck drivers as an example, what would be the most optimistic or rosy outcome for them, say 10 years from now, you know, at least 1 or 2 million lose their jobs? We do have a UBI. What would those truck drivers be doing, in your opinion?
Well, it depends how old they are and what other skills they are, and those are the things I can identify now, but it also depends on a bunch of on what changes next to this economy that I can't foresee. So part of that, I really can't foresee. But the younger you are, the more other skills you have, the more you're going to be able to retrain and readapt and do other stuff. But if you're my age, I'm 54, if I'm a truck driver and I'm losing my job, I mean, and that's what I studied all my life, that's what I specialized in, I'm unlikely to get one of those maybe new chauffeur jobs that's going to be opening up in my field. Maybe the head of a trucking company will need a chauffeur. And I'm unlikely at my age, I'm unlikely to be able to retrain for something. A few people even in their 50s or 60s will, but a lot won't. And if our pension system or our basic income is generous enough, that is not a problem, because work, and when we say work in this country, we mean taking a job, and we mean taking orders from going in somewhere and taking orders. Work, in that sense, is not the only fulfilling and good thing you can do with your life. If you have a generous basic income or a generous pension, you can find your own work, your own meaningful contribution that doesn't involve taking orders from somebody, and find something you find to give meaning for your life. And I think a lot of people will find that on their own. They shouldn't have to. I mean, if you're a certain age, you shouldn't feel like you have to go on. When Thomas Paine is often credited with being the originator of basic income. He wasn't. It was actually somebody responding to him named Thomas Pence, who has the oldest known true basic income. He wanted a coming-of-age grant so you could get started, and then a pension, and he started his pension at 55. You work for 30, 40 years, you don't need to keep working at 55. Well, we've edged that up to 65, now going into the 70s. Maybe we should be telling people, if you want to retire at 55, that's okay. We appreciate that. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Karl. So I have difficulty with universal basic income. That I just can't see where it fits.
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about the endemic injustice in the present system. We talk about control of property. We talk about the redistribution of wealth. So you talk about all these things which universal basic income would solve. And yet, you also said that, people are coming, that basic income, people are coming from different angles on basic income. So are you saying that they're coming from it from different political, left and right? And what I don't understand is, why is it that politicians who seem to be on the right of center tend to be attracted to basic income and not politicians? And I don't understand all the economics of it, and I know it's incredibly complex, but why don't we hear politicians on the left of center talking about media?
Well, actually, most of the politicians who talk about basic income are so far left of center that you don't hear about them. The Green Party in the United States has had basic income in its platform every year since the 1990s, every presidential election since the 90s. The Green Party in the UK supported it, had been supporting it since the 70s. Then they got closer to power, and they dropped it.
That makes sense.
Yes, to get closer to the mainstream. Die Linke Party in Germany, which is German for the left, the head of Die Linke had this is the greatest quote about basic income, which translates to the old left wanted to control the means of production. The new left wants control over our lives. And that's so important, because having one vote in a whole society where that controls the means of production really doesn't solve the problems I was talking about. You have to go to the people who control resources. And the privileged people always control the dialogue, and they have self-serving minds. So being in a socialist economy but with a work requirement doesn't guarantee that you're going to have any greater control over your life than you are in a market economy that has all of this. So there is a very substantial left support. If you look at a lot of the support that brought on this wave of basic income support that we've been seeing grow for the last 5 or 10 years, that's been driven by a lot of people that are very much left of center. The right-wing argument for it tends to be like, well, let's get rid of the welfare system and then just replace it with basic income. And that is not popular with the basic income movement in the world today.
That's what I really wanted to know as well. All right, next.
Well, I think this will probably conclude some of our remarks this evening. Let's all thank Karl for coming. Everybody's going to say in New York.
Wait, I do have one question.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you support Andrew Yang?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually. That was kind of a weird one for me because there are some. I have some reservations about Yang, which is that he doesn't include children in the basic income. When the children of single mothers are the poorest people in the country, and that's the worst time in your life to be poor. That creates costs for you and for society for the rest of your life. No amount of money when you're an adult can make up for that. So that I have a problem with. I don't think that the VAT is the best way to finance it. I think the VAT can be part of an overall progressive system, but I don't think it's a necessary part. And I don't like to support nuclear power. However, there's always one thing is that I have a really hard time not endorsing somebody who's endorsed me. I mean, one of the first things he did, he put out like a campaign ad with my picture on it and a quote of me. And I'm like, you think this is going to help you become president? And then I wouldn't quote me if I was and then he also called me one of the godfathers of the basic income movement. I met him and it was really nice, and I asked him, and I was also with Almaz Zalecki, who is the most radical pro-mother feminist, pro-single mother feminist in the basic income movement. And I was with her when I met her, and so she's my conscience on the child issue, and she was as charmed by it as much as I was. And it was really cool meeting him. And we asked him about this, and he said his answer was, I needed a program that was costed, and this one was fully costed, and so I had to go listen. And the thing is, if you listen to him talk, if you read his book, and I've reviewed his book, but we've not reviewed his book. It's a very positive review. He understands the kind of arguments that I make for basic income, and he sympathizes with them. He understands the real problems that people in this country are having. People, at the low end of the income distribution. He understands these kind of problems, and he cares about them. So, yes, I endorse Andrew Yang. As a matter of fact, I've been meaning to, for the last, 9 months, I've been meaning to write an essay of, for the basic income movement. Should we endorse the guy who endorsed us? And I'm going to argue, yes. I haven't had the time to write it. I just sat down to write it, and I ended up writing something else. But hopefully I'll write that sooner or later. But yes, I do support Andrew Yang.
Is Andrew Yang going to get into basic
No, he's not. Where is he then? Is the March going to come in? It's opening up in a new city every day.
Yeah, he is. The latest I heard is he's going to do something like the London March, and it's like a scheduled fundraising, multiple fundraising.
It'll be a surprise.
In a different state.
Yeah.